We all need a break. Sure, everybody has their own way of dealing with life's problems, but one thing we all have in common is a want, a need to escape sometimes. Whether that means traveling to a place you've never been, spending time with friends and family, sitting on the couch playing video games, we all need to get away sometimes. But what happens if we stay away too long? Firewatch is a first-person walking simulator played from the perspective of Henry. No, not that Henry either. This Henry, a middle-aged Colorado native who takes a fire lookout job in the Shoshone National Forest after his wife's tragic development of dementia. The opening sequence is a brutal roller coaster of emotions as Henry is forced to deal with his wife slowly forgetting who he is. First, Henry turns to drink for comfort, often sitting on the balcony with a couple of beers or going out to bars late at night, which gives the player the first glimpse of his desire to escape. Then his wife's family takes her away indefinitely, prompting Henry to follow suit and leave as well. The opening sequence is intercut with scenes of Henry making his way deeper into the forest, signaling to the player that the further Henry's wife falls into dementia, the further he tries to get away from it. The game treats this fire lookout job as an escape for people who are running away from something, or someone. As I said in my previous Firewatch video, Firewatch at its core is a game about people with problems. And it seems the predominant way they deal with it is by escaping. In this context, escaping in regards to the idea of escapism can be defined as a temporary break from work, tragedy, or an emotionally strenuous event. With that in mind, Firewatch uses its characters to explore how escapism affects different people with different problems, and argues that while it can provide temporary relief, it is ultimately dangerous for people not willing to face their problems. Spoiler alert, by the way, for basically the entire game. During the player's first night, they meet Delilah, who is introduced as a sarcastic, goofy, and maybe a bit too playful supervisor. Over the radio, she states that people come to this job to get away, suggesting that she has been here for a while and that the lookouts she supervises are usually looking for an escape, similar to Henry. The next morning, Delilah reveals that she was drunk, and thus the presence of alcohol resurfaces. However, it seems strange that drinking occurs at a job that she just told us is used as an escape, given that alcohol is treated as its own form of escape in the opening sequence. Are people who take this job so desperate to escape their problems that isolating themselves in a huge area of dense forest for a whole summer isn't enough? Well, as the player later finds out, yes. Sometimes people want to be alone when dealing with these kinds of problems, but other times just having someone to take your mind off it helps a lot. With the drunken introduction and constant subtle flirtation between them, Henry's interactions with Delilah definitely seem to provide some relief, and even reinforces the benefits of escaping, especially when Henry finds out that Delilah is running away from her own similar problems, and has been for a while now. After a brief conversation about Henry's wife's condition that led him to take this job, which the player can choose to keep secret, by the way, Delilah reveals that she too sought escape after dealing with a failed relationship.
So, a couple of months before I took this job, I was with this guy, Javier. And I was sure I was going to marry Javier as soon as I could be bothered. Javier's brother got killed working in Gillette, and for some reason, I didn't come home. Javier said it was fine, he'd go to the funeral, take care of his mom, stuff like that, it'd be easier solo. When he came back, he left me. I came out here, I lied and told my sister he fucked our neighbor. I've just lied about it for over 10 years.
Delilah even went a step further by lying to her sister, saying that he cheated on her in order to avoid having to come to terms with the pain. And by choosing to keep Henry's wife a secret, the player is giving into that same destructive fear of having to face your problems, instead of enjoying this time with Delilah. So you can avoid it by lying about it or not mentioning it at all, and thus saving yourself the trouble of coming to terms with the truth. After spending every day with Delilah, finding out you both have deeply similar problems, and getting caught up in a budding conspiracy together, which you can find out about in my previous video on Firewatch, the player develops a connection with her that grows stronger with every flirtatious exchange until it culminates in day 64.
I don't talk to the other lookouts as much as I talk to you. Not in the same way. And I know you're not really available, but I want you to know, well, maybe it'd be nice to get together at the end of the summer. I wish I was over there. We could sit outside. We could talk without these radios. We could,
What? What could we do?
well, let me tell you.
It's simply meant to reinforce in the player's head that Henry made the quote-unquote right decision by escaping to this Firewatch job, as Delilah represents the benefits of doing so. However, because she too is running from her own problems, the question remains, does that make her the angel or devil on his shoulder? At the end of the game, the player discovers that all the supposed weird or conspiratorial things happening to Henry and Delilah were the doings of a former lookout, Ned, who lost his son in a climbing accident. Instead of going back home and facing all the questions and tragedy of leaving for a Firewatch job with your son one day and then returning without him, he chose to escape it all, in the most extreme way possible. He chose not to tell Delilah, ventured deeper into the forest, then secluded himself and tried to prevent Henry from discovering the truth, in fact going to extreme lengths to do so. Breaking and entering into Henry's tower, tapping their radios, recording their conversations, potentially to use for blackmail, and even straight up battery at one point. All signs also point to Ned as the arsonist behind a forest fire in the later half of the game. The desperation in Ned's actions show how afraid he was to face the tragedy of his son's death. Delilah even argues Ned killed his son, that it was no accident, giving some justification for the extremities of his attempts. But whether that's true or not is for the player to decide. Although despite Ned's desperate attempts to prevent the secret of his son getting out, Henry eventually found the body, and Ned was thus faced with a choice: to either finally face his tragedy or run away even further. Well, he made it this far, right? So why not keep running? Despite a forest fire raging across the Shoshone, partly thanks to him, he ran deeper into the forest, quite literally jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire. A fitting comeuppance to show how trying to desperately run away from your problems only results in your own detriment. If Delilah was meant to argue for the temporary benefits of escapism, then Ned represents the extreme, when you try to run away from your problems for too long, and how it can become destructive to yourself and others. Similar to how Ned treats the secret about his son's death, Henry avoids talking about his wife with Delilah, or at least tries to make the conversation as brief as possible. It's normal for people to be in denial when such tragedy engulfs them, but there comes a point when denial turns into a refusal to even think about it, a refusal to face their emotions. One can't really blame them, however. Life can be brutal. But it is important to recognize when someone isn't taking a break from their problems anymore. Rather, they're running from them. Because life eventually catches up to everyone. And if you're unprepared when it does, it'll be that much harder to handle. When the forest burns down at the end, Henry waits for the rescue helicopter in Delilah's tower and converses with Delilah, who's already been evacuated, over radio one last time. It's obvious by the tone of his voice and hesitance in his speech, of which praise is owed to the tremendous voice acting of Rich Sommer, that Henry is still holding onto the hope of something with Delilah, a woman that he's grown quite fond of in the wake of a tragedy that befell a woman he committed his life to. Delilah, however, recognizing this, promptly tells him to go back to his wife, and in doing so, to face his problems, his emotions. With this final piece of advice, Delilah answers our previous question and becomes the angel on Henry's shoulder, indulging in his escape and showing us that a temporary break can be beneficial, but ultimately reminding us that we have to face our problems eventually. On the other hand, the game presents the extreme of escapism in Ned, a man who ran away from his problems to the point of being destructive to himself and others. In doing so, Firewatch argues that while escapism can offer temporary relief from the problems and tragedies of life, it is ultimately destructive if you try to stay away for too long. Escapism is all about choice. Whether you choose to face or run from your problems is completely up to you, but you should at least know the consequences of each. Because when you try to run away from or suppress your emotions for too long, you become like Ezra Miller from Fantastic Beasts. Okay, actually, that's a joke. But the point is, Facing your emotions in the wake of tragedy is difficult. It's brutal, it's painful, but it helps you grow. Having the strength to face the next wave of tragedy in the tumultuous ocean of life comes from overcoming the adversity you are currently facing. Think about it like this. A forest fire is destructive and tragic, yes, but after the fire, new life springs and grows in its wake. So when you return to reality to face your problems, be as the forest during a fire. Endure the pain, then enjoy the peace that comes after. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching. I hope you got something useful out of this. Hope you learned something. Don't run away from your problems. Everyone has to face them eventually. Other than that, if you liked the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you have something to say in response to my thoughts or otherwise, do so in the comments down below. Thank you to my patrons for supporting me and donating. Always awesome. And if you want to support me, subscribe and see more content like this. More Firewatch commentaries to come, by the way. Other than that, I will see you all in the next video. Goodbye!